And they saying they left their guns at home, though. They started shooting back. Then some chicks was in the Sea Breeze, started following a white Sea Breeze, ragtop Sea Breeze.
He just described hunting Tupac, spotting him at that intersection, watching him hang out the window moments before the shooting. He's confessing on camera, casually, like it's just another story from the streets. What he doesn't realize is there's another recording, one he never knew existed. The confession tapes. For years after Tupac's death, the case went cold. The investigation was plagued by gang rivalries, conspiracy theories, and a pervasive lack of witness cooperation that's all too common in these types of street-level homicides. Nobody wanted to talk. Nobody wanted to be labeled a snitch. The code of silence held firm, even as theories about who killed Tupac multiplied and spread through hip-hop culture like wildfire. Meanwhile, life went on for the main players in that white Cadillac. Orlando Anderson, the young Crips member who had been beaten at the MGM Grand and whom many suspected of being the actual trigger man, continued his life in the streets. But street life has a way of catching up with you. On May 29, 1998, less than 2 years after Tupac's murder, Anderson was killed in an unrelated gang shooting in Compton, California. He was never charged with Tupac's murder. He took whatever he knew to his grave. But his uncle, Dwayne Keffy D. Davis, was still alive, still active in the streets, and as it turns out, still talking. In fact, he couldn't stop talking. And that's where our story takes a fascinating turn, because what Davis didn't fully understand about the American justice system and the limitations of immunity deals would eventually lead to his downfall. It took years, but he finally broke his silence.
And he happened to be hanging out the window. He was hanging out the window like he was in a parade.
Tupac.
Yeah, he was.
So what happens next?
And we just came, and shit, I ain't gonna go into the details like that. You know what I'm saying?
Jump forward to 2008 to 2009. By this time, Keffy D found himself in serious trouble. He was facing federal drug charges for running a PCP trafficking operation, charges that could put him away for a very long time. The feds had him dead to rights, and he was looking at spending potentially the rest of his life in prison. But the federal government was interested in something else, something bigger than just another drug case. They wanted to solve the murders of Tupac Shakur and the notorious Big, Christopher Wallace, who had been gunned down in Los Angeles just 6 months after Tupac's death. A special task force had been assembled, bringing together the Los Angeles Police Department and federal investigators. They believed these two murders were connected, that Biggie's killing was retaliation for Tupac's, an escalation of the East Coast-West Coast rap war that had consumed hip-hop in the mid-1990s. And they needed insiders to talk. They needed someone who was there, someone who knew what really happened. Enter Dwayne Keffy D. Davis. Davis signed what's called a proffer agreement, sometimes referred to as a Queen for a Day agreement. In simple terms, this meant he could provide information to investigators without that specific testimony being used against him in federal court. It was meant to encourage him to be truthful without fear of immediate prosecution. The agreement explicitly stated, no information provided by Davis during the proffer session will be used against him in any criminal prosecution by the United States. Sounds pretty airtight, right? Here's what Davis apparently didn't fully grasp. This protection only applied to federal cases. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department was not a party to this agreement. And more importantly, this immunity only covered what he said during those specific proffer sessions. If he repeated the same story elsewhere, in media interviews, in a memoir, on YouTube videos, anywhere outside the protective umbrella of that agreement, all bets were off. And Davis, he repeated his story, a lot, for years, with increasing detail and decreasing concern about the legal ramifications.
So Orlando shot across Dre?
He leaned over on the window, we rolled down the window, popped.
Who was it?
They would drove on my side, I would popped them. You know what I'm saying? But they was on the other side.
Right.
In late 2008, Davis sat down with LAPD detectives, including Greg Kading, a detective who had been assigned to the cold case unit investigating both Tupac's and Biggie's murders. With the proffer agreement in place and the pressure of those federal drug charges hanging over his head, Davis began to talk. And what he said was extraordinary. For the first time, someone who was actually there, someone who was in that white Cadillac, was describing in vivid detail what happened on that September night in Las Vegas. Davis placed himself in the front passenger seat of the vehicle. He described how they had obtained a .40 caliber Glock. He explained their motivation, revenge for the beating Orlando Anderson had suffered at the MGM Grand. He named names. He described the moment when they pulled up alongside Suge Knight's BMW at that red light. And then he described what happened next. Davis told detectives that he handed the gun to the back seat. He said that Orlando Anderson grabbed it and, seeing Tupac hanging out the window, opened fire. 13 shots, boom, boom, boom. He described how Tupac was hanging out the window like he was in a parade, just moments before the bullets started flying. The details he provided matched the ballistics evidence. Police had recovered 13.40 caliber shell casings at the scene. Davis's account explained how the shooting happened, why it happened, and who was in the car when it went down. It was the kind of breakthrough that cold case investigators dream about. But here's where it gets even more interesting. These initial recordings were protected under the proffer agreement. The LAPD couldn't use them directly to prosecute Davis for Tupac's murder in Nevada. However, in July 2009, Davis met with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police detectives, and this meeting was completely voluntary. There was no proffer agreement with Vegas police, no immunity deal, nothing protecting him, and Davis told them the same story. He confirmed his role as the shot caller that night. He detailed how they pulled up alongside the BMW.
Big Dre, Orlando. Who shot Tupac?
The keeper for the code of the streets. It just came from the backseat, bro.
He even acknowledged during this interview that Vegas police hadn't offered him any immunity. Y'all ain't from Vegas, so no immunity here. In 2019, Davis published a memoir titled Compton Street Legend. In this book, he didn't just hint at his involvement in Tupac's murder. He laid it all out in explicit detail. He described how he acquired the gun for the purpose of hunting down Tupac and Suge Knight. He recounted the events of that night with the kind of specificity that only someone who was actually there could provide. The book was marketed as a tell-all from a gangster who had lived through the most violent era of West Coast hip-hop. For Davis, it was apparently an opportunity to tell his story, to claim his place in hip-hop history, and presumably to make some money off the notoriety. What he didn't seem to realize, or perhaps didn't care about, was that by publishing this account, he had completely and irrevocably waived any protection that proffer agreement might have offered. As former LAPD detective Greg Kading later explained, the proffer protected the first confession, but that's not the case for the interviews that followed, and certainly not for a published memoir that anyone could walk into a bookstore and purchase. But Davis wasn't done. He did interviews promoting the book. He appeared in documentaries. He showed up in the 2018 BET docuseries Unsolved. He posted videos on YouTube where he bragged about being the shot caller that night. He seemed to relish his role in hip-hop infamy, telling and retelling the story of that September night in Las Vegas with varying levels of detail, but always confirming the basic facts. He was there. He provided the gun, and he knew exactly what was going to happen. Meanwhile, in Las Vegas, detectives hadn't forgotten about Tupac Shakur. Cold cases may go quiet, but in police departments across the country, they never truly close. And in 2018, something interesting happened. Retired LAPD detective Greg Kading reached out to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's cold case unit. He shared his files, including those recordings of Davis's confessions. The timing was significant. Davis had just published his memoir and was actively doing media appearances, talking openly about his role in the murder. The Las Vegas detectives, led by Homicide Lieutenant Jason Johansson and Sergeant Kevin Manning, began building a case. They subpoenaed the audio recordings from the 2008 to 2009 interviews. They collected transcripts. They gathered Davis's media appearances, his book, his YouTube videos, everything. On July 17, 2023, Las Vegas police executed a search warrant on Davis's home in Henderson, Nevada. They seized guns, photographs, documents, and perhaps most tellingly, a copy of Davis's own memoir, Compton Street Legend. The book that he had written to tell his story was now being used as evidence against him. And then, on September 29, 2023, almost exactly 27 years after Tupac Shakur was shot, Dwayne Keffy D. Davis was arrested and indicted for first-degree murder with a gang enhancement. The charges didn't allege that Davis pulled the trigger. They alleged that he orchestrated the hit, provided the weapon, and directed the crew, making him just as guilty under Nevada law as the person who actually fired the shots. As one investigator told Rolling Stone, Davis had been running his mouth for years, and those words had finally caught up with him. Sheriff Kevin McMahill stated, "We never forgot about this case. These confessions show we never stopped." The man who thought he was protected, who believed his proffer agreement gave him a lifetime immunity to talk about his crimes, was now facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. Tupac's murder caught on camera? September 7th, 1996, Las Vegas, Nevada. The City of Lights was buzzing with an energy that could only come from one of the biggest boxing matches of the decade. Mike Tyson had just demolished Bruce Seldon in just 109 seconds, and the MGM Grand Hotel was packed with celebrities, high rollers, and hip-hop royalty. Among them was Tupac Shakur, one of the most influential rappers of all time, riding high on the success of his latest work, living life in the fast lane alongside Marion Suge Knight, the imposing head of Death Row Records. But within hours, that electric Vegas night would transform into one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in music history. A mystery that would spawn countless theories, investigations that went nowhere, and questions that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades, until someone made a catastrophic mistake, until someone couldn't keep their mouth shut, until Dwayne "Keffy D" Davis decided to tell his story over and over again, not realizing that his words were being captured, documented, and would ultimately seal his fate. This is the story of how Tupac's killer didn't know he was recorded, not shooting at him, but confessing to orchestrating it repeatedly for over 15 years, thinking he was protected, thinking he was untouchable. He was wrong. To understand how we got to that fateful intersection on East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, we need to rewind a few hours. The Tyson fight had ended almost as quickly as it began, and the crowd was spilling out of the MGM Grand, their adrenaline still pumping from the knockout they'd just witnessed. Tupac, dressed in a black vest and jeans, was riding that same wave of energy as he moved through the hotel lobby with his entourage. And that's when it happened. Someone in Tupac's crew spotted Orlando Anderson, a 21-year-old member of the Southside Compton Crips gang. There was history there, bad history. Word on the street was that Anderson had been involved in snatching a Death Row Records medallion from one of Suge's associates at a mall in Compton. And in the world that Tupac and Suge inhabited, such disrespect couldn't stand. What happened next was captured on the MGM Grand security cameras, grainy footage that would be analyzed frame by frame in the years to come. Tupac, Suge, and several members of their crew surrounded Anderson and unleashed a brutal beating right there in the casino lobby. Fists flew, kicks landed, and within seconds, Anderson was on the ground, getting stomped by multiple attackers. Hotel security rushed in to break it up, but the damage was done, not just to Anderson's body, but to something far more dangerous, his pride, his reputation in the gang world, where respect is currency and revenge is inevitable. As Anderson was escorted out of the casino, bruised and humiliated, the wheels were already turning. In the code of the streets that governed these rival factions, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. This was just the beginning of a chain of events that would end in tragedy before the night was through. While Tupac and his entourage left the MGM Grand, heading toward their next destination, Club 662, a night spot that Suge Knight owned, Orlando Anderson was making phone calls. He reached out to his uncle, Dwayne "Keffy D" Davis, a leader in the Southside Compton Crips. Davis was no small-time gang member. He was a shot caller, someone who commanded respect and could organize swift retaliation. According to the accounts that would later emerge, Davis quickly assembled a crew. Joining him were Anderson, Terrence "Bubble Up" Brown, who would drive, and DeAndre "Big Dre" Smith. They climbed into a white Cadillac, a car that would soon become infamous in hip-hop history. Davis has described how they obtained a .40 caliber Glock handgun, tossed it in the back seat, and began cruising the Las Vegas Strip, hunting for their target.
This was the white Cadillac.
Yeah.
The crew headed to Club 662, expecting to find Tupac and Suge there. But when they arrived and scoped out the scene, their targets hadn't shown up yet. The anticipation was building. One witness later recalled seeing the Cadillac pull up and knowing immediately that something was about to go down. Everyone in that world could feel it. The tension was that thick, that palpable. But Tupac and Suge never arrived at the club that night. They were taking a detour that would prove fatal. Tupac was riding in Suge Knight's black BMW 750, sitting in the passenger seat with the window down, feeling the warm desert air of that September night. They were headed toward Club 662, cruising down Las Vegas Boulevard, music probably thumping from the speakers. Behind them, a small convoy of vehicles followed, friends, associates, bodyguards. It was a scene that had played out countless times before, the entourage of a rap superstar moving through the city like a presidential motorcade. But then something caught Tupac's attention. Female fans on the corner of the street recognizing the megastar in the BMW. Their screams cut through the night air. "Tupac! Tupac!" And Tupac, ever the showman, ever the performer, responded by leaning out the window, engaging with them, soaking in that adoration that had become as essential to him as breathing. What Tupac didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the white Cadillac carrying his would-be assassins was just moments away. They had been cruising the Strip, searching, and now they were coming up Flamingo Road. The intersection at East Flamingo and Koval Lane had a red light. Suge Knight's BMW rolled to a stop, and within seconds, the white Cadillac pulled up alongside them, driver's side to passenger side by side, as Keffe D would later confirm in multiple interviews. Time seemed to slow down in those final seconds. Tupac was still hanging out the window. The girls were still screaming his name in the background. And in the white Cadillac, according to the accounts that would later surface, someone in the back seat grabbed the Glock. The streets were about to erupt in gunfire that would echo through hip-hop history for decades to come. What happened next lasted only seconds, but changed everything. According to multiple accounts and ballistics evidence, 13 rounds were fired from a .40 caliber handgun. The sound of gunshots shattered the Vegas night, cutting through the sounds of traffic, music, and those distant screams of Tupac, Tupac that had drawn his attention just moments before. Tupac Shakur was hit 4 times, twice in the chest, once in the arm, and once in the thigh. The bullets tore through his body with devastating effect. Suge Knight, the massive Death Row Records CEO sitting in the driver's seat, was grazed in the head by a bullet, a wound that bled profusely but wasn't fatal. In the chaos and confusion with bullets flying and glass shattering, Suge managed to make a U-turn and drive away from the scene, attempting to get Tupac to a hospital as quickly as possible, but the damage was already done. The bullets that struck Tupac had caused catastrophic internal injuries. He was rushed to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada, where doctors worked desperately to save his life. He underwent multiple surgeries. He fought for 6 days, his body trying to recover from wounds that were simply too severe. And on September 13, 1996, at just 25 years old, Tupac Amaru Shakur was pronounced dead. The Reckoning, when the past catches up. As of October 8, 2025, Dwayne Keffe D. Davis remains in custody at the Clark County Detention Center, awaiting a trial that has been delayed multiple times and is currently scheduled for February 2026. The case against him is built on a foundation that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. His own words, repeated in multiple forms over more than 15 years. The prosecution's case is straightforward. They're using Davis's voluntary statements, his memoir, his media interviews, his YouTube appearances, and those crucial recordings from the unprotected 2009 Las Vegas police interview to demonstrate that he was not just present at the murder scene, but that he played an essential role in orchestrating it. Under Nevada law, you don't have to be the person who pulls the trigger to be charged with murder. If you help plan it, provide the weapon, or facilitate it in a significant way, you're just as culpable. The grand jury that indicted Davis was presented with a wealth of evidence. They saw autopsy photos of Tupac's body, showing the devastating wounds caused by those .40 caliber bullets. They watched video footage of the assault on Orlando Anderson at the MGM Grand, establishing the motive for retaliation. They heard audio recordings of Davis describing, in his own voice, how the shooting went down. They reviewed ballistics evidence showing that 13 shell casings were recovered from the scene, exactly matching the number of shots Davis claimed were fired. But perhaps most damaging of all, they had Davis's own book, where he wrote in black and white that he obtained the gun for the purpose of hunting down Tupac and Suge Knight. It's rare in criminal prosecutions to have such direct evidence of intent, and it came not from a wiretap or a confidential informant, but from the defendant himself, published and distributed for profit. Davis's legal team, led by attorney Carl Arnold, has mounted several defenses, though none have gained much traction so far. Their primary argument centers on the proffer agreement. In January 2025, they filed motions to dismiss the charges, arguing that Davis's 2009 confession should be covered under the immunity deal, and that prosecuting him now violates due process, especially given the 16-year gap between his confession and his arrest. Judge Carly Kearney rejected this argument in July 2025, ruling that Davis's repeated public statements about his role in the murder, statements made completely voluntarily and outside any protective agreement, effectively voided whatever protections the original proffer might have provided. The judge's reasoning was clear. You can't claim immunity for statements you chose to, broadcast to the world through books, interviews, and social media. But in March 2025, Davis tried a different tactic. In an exclusive jailhouse interview with ABC News, he suddenly claimed that everything he had said for the past 15 years was a lie. According to this new version of events, Davis fabricated the entire story for book sales. "I lied for money. Ghostwriter made it up," he told ABC. He claimed he wasn't even in Las Vegas that night, that he was actually at home in Los Angeles. This recantation raises obvious questions. Why would someone repeatedly confess to a murder they didn't commit? Why would they provide details that match the physical evidence, the caliber of the weapon, the number of shots fired, the positioning of the vehicles, if they weren't actually there? Why would they write a book about it, do countless interviews about it, and brag about it on social media for over a decade? The prosecution's answer is simple: because he did it, and he couldn't resist claiming credit for one of the most notorious murders in hip-hop history. Only now, facing life in prison, is he trying to take it all back. But unringing that bell has proven impossible. One question that continues to generate debate, even with Davis's arrest, is who actually fired the fatal shots? For years, Davis consistently named his nephew Orlando Anderson as the trigger man. In his recorded confessions, Davis described how Anderson grabbed the Glock from the back seat saying, "Unk, this me," and opened fire. However, grand jury transcripts unsealed in 2025 included testimony suggesting that it might have been DeAndre Big Dre Smith who fired the shots, not Anderson. Some witnesses claimed Anderson's shot was blocked and that Smith, sitting in the other rear seat, actually pulled the trigger. In one interview excerpt, when asked directly who shot Tupac, Davis appeared to stutter and struggle before saying the shots came from the back seat without naming a specific person.
Big Dre, Orlando. Who shot Tupac?
To keep it for the code of the streets. It just came from the back seat, bro.
Ultimately, from a legal standpoint, it may not matter. Both Anderson and Smith are deceased. Anderson was killed in 1998, and Smith has also since died. Under the law, Davis's role in orchestrating the hit makes him legally responsible regardless of who actually squeezed the trigger. But for historians, hip-hop fans, and those seeking a complete picture of that night, the question remains somewhat open. Even with Davis's arrest and the seemingly straightforward evidence against him, conspiracy theories about Tupac's death continue to flourish. The most famous is the Machiavelli theory, the idea that Tupac faked his own death. Believers point to his final album, The Don Illuminati, the 7-Day Theory, released posthumously. They note that Tupac adopted the name Machiavelli, inspired by the Italian philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, who wrote about faking one's death to deceive enemies. They interpret the album's title as a hint that Tupac would resurrect after 7 days, or perhaps 7 years. The album cover, showing Tupac crucified like Jesus Christ, added fuel to these theories. Fans have pointed to alleged sightings of Tupac in various locations, most notably in Cuba, where his aunt Assata Shakur lives in political exile. There have been claims of Tupac hiding under government protection or living quietly away from the spotlight. Every few years, a new sighting or clue emerges, keeping the theory alive in online communities and social media. Other theories have pointed fingers at different suspects. Some believe Suge Knight orchestrated the hit to prevent Tupac from leaving Death Row Records. Others have claimed the notorious Big or Sean Diddy Combs put out a contract as part of the East Coast-West Coast rap war. There have been theories involving corrupt LAPD officers, broader music industry conspiracies, and even claims of Illuminati involvement. But here's what we actually know. The autopsy was performed, the death certificate was issued, graphic photographs of Tupac's body showing the gunshot wounds were presented to the grand jury. Medical records document his 6-day fight for life in the hospital. And we have multiple recorded confessions from someone who was actually there, describing in detail how and why the shooting happened. The conspiracy theories persist because Tupac was more than just a rapper. He was a cultural icon, a poet, a revolutionary voice whose loss felt impossible to accept. The idea that his death could be reduced to a simple gang retaliation over a fistfight seems almost mundane compared to the larger-than-life persona he projected. But sometimes, tragically, the truth is exactly that simple. An October 2024 investigation by the Shakur family into possible involvement by Sean Diddy Combs yielded no public results, and Combs has consistently denied any role in the murder. But with Davis's arrest, at least one person was finally facing justice. Yet justice delayed is complicated. Tupac's mother, Afeni Shakur, who spent years advocating for answers about her son's death, died in 2016 without seeing anyone charged. Orlando Anderson, the man who allegedly pulled the trigger, died in 1998 without ever facing charges for Tupac's murder. Suge Knight, who was in the car with Tupac that night and witnessed the shooting, is currently serving a 28-year prison sentence for an unrelated manslaughter case and has offered conflicting accounts over the years about what he saw. If convicted, Davis faces life in prison. At 60 years old, that would effectively be a death sentence. For a man who spent years bragging about his role in one of hip-hop's most infamous murders, the price of that braggadocio may turn out to be the rest of his life. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.